A few years ago, a company named Mattress Inquirer conducted a survey of 1,038 people. The goal of this survey was to determine how oversleeping affected them, and they found some interesting things. First, they found that roughly 55% of those people reported oversleeping at least once per week. Of those people, 75% reported missing work due to sleeping in. They also found that people who use a smartphone as an alarm rather than a physical alarm overslept more often and for longer. They also tended to hit the snooze button more often than the people that had a physical alarm clock. Some of the most common reported reasons for sleeping in were, I slept through my alarm, I forgot to set my alarm, I turned off my alarm, I slept poorly, and I went to bed later than I should have. Sleep is one of those things that we need every single day. Just like food and drink, it's a necessity that we get a healthy amount of it. But also, like those things, overuse or improper use of sleep can get us into trouble. So let's say that you are one of those 55% of people that sleep in at least once a week. And if you're one of those 75% of people that missed work because of it, and this is something that happens weekly, I don't think you have to worry about missing work very much longer. I'm sure that more than one of us felt some of that this past week as we all changed our clocks. I know I had a bit of trouble on Monday and Tuesday getting out of bed myself. And that 1 hour means something. And actually, according to an article in Time magazine that was published in 2019, an average person needs 4 days of adequate sleep in order to make up for only 1 single hour of lost sleep. So that 1 hour last weekend could theoretically lead to us needing 4 straight days of 7 to 9 restful hours every night in order to catch up on that 1 lost hour. And so we can conclude that the right amount of sleep is good for us, as necessary and healthy as exercise and a good diet. And when we don't get that, it only leads to problems. One of those is sleeping in. There's a similar discussion that we can have regarding our spiritual lives. And we talked about this a few weeks ago in Bible study. We are commanded to rest, to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. And part of this means that we do need that physical rest, and it's good for our bodies. But another part of that means that we need spiritual rest and rejuvenation, every bit as much as we need physical rest and rejuvenation. And yet, there seems to be a line where spiritual rest and rejuvenation turns into slumber and sleeping in. There are things that we do in the darkness of a spiritual slumber, and our Bibles repeatedly call us out of that darkness. Let's read together from Ephesians 5, verses 8 through 14. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of the light, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, and find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." That last part almost sounds like a parent trying to get their kid out of bed for school, doesn't it? Wake up, sleeper. But what if we are that kid? What if we are the ones that are sleeping in? What if we're crossing that line between spiritual rest and rejuvenation and entering the territory of spiritual slumber? And what does it mean to be caught up in that spiritual slumber, oversleeping on our faith? And perhaps it might help to look at a couple aspects of what it means to be really asleep. So first, when we sleep, we aren't watching anything, right? We aren't aware of our surroundings. And I know that sounds obvious. Our eyes are closed, after all. but it's important. It means that it's much easier for us to be caught off guard. Someone sneaking up on you while you're sleeping, things happening around you while you're sleeping, being caught off guard, not ready when you wake up, that's unsettling. In our spiritual life, being caught off guard should be equally unsettling. Being caught off guard spiritually means that we haven't been watching out for sin. We haven't been guarding ourselves against the tempter. Matthew 25 is a great example of this. Jesus is telling a parable about what the coming of the kingdom of heaven will look like, and he likens it to 10 virgins who are waiting for the bridegroom. 5 of these virgins are ready, their lamps trimmed with oil. The other 5, though, they only had lamps and no oil to go with it. While they're waiting for the bridegroom, they all fall asleep. So when the bridegroom is finally announced and they all wake up, the ones who are ready are able to go into the wedding feast. But the others are stuck outside because they had to go buy oil for their lamps. They were caught off guard. They weren't ready. And Jesus tells us, therefore, keep watch. Be ready. Being asleep spiritually means that we can let things sneak into our lives that affect our readiness for the kingdom of heaven. And if we oversleep, that means that we aren't really keeping watch. Another quality of being asleep means that we aren't active. And again, this is obvious, but it's important. Sleep wouldn't be very restful if we're still moving around and still working. So naturally, as we sleep, we lay down. Hopefully, we're mostly still, because even restless sleep is bad for us. If we toss and we turn too much, we don't wake up feeling refreshed. True rest means that we need to find a time of calm, of no action. And that is what we want for our bodies. But again, though, there's a line that we need to be careful of. If we fall asleep when we should be active, when we have things we need to do or places we need to be, then all of a sudden that period of calm inaction becomes unhelpful, unfruitful. If we fall asleep while we're working, that's no good for us or our employer. If we fall asleep while we're driving, that can be fatal. If we fall asleep in class or in church, we don't learn anything. The same trap comes into our lives when we end up sleeping on our faith. Faith is something we tend to think of as an internal thing, something we possess, a belief that we have inside ourselves. Faith isn't something you can see, right? Faith is an internal belief that you hold on to. But I would say that faith is more than that. Faith is certainly all of those things, but faith is also an active thing. Jesus, after washing his disciples' feet, tells them, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. There's an action being asked of us in these instructions. It's not telling us just believe in God, only follow Jesus, only go to church. We have to do things. Now we can say, hey, I come to church, I read my Bible, I'm doing things. And yes, that is true. But inaction can also include stopping short of what God truly wants us to do. And that's a tough one sometimes. You mean God wants more of us than reading a chapter of our Bible every night, coming to church for an hour? And simply put, yes. Yes, he does. Stopping short of all that we're called to do as Christians is also inaction. It's also spiritually sleeping in. But let's move on to one more characteristic of sleep. Usually sleep is easier in darkness, right? Usually, and I say usually because there are those people who can sleep anywhere, but usually it's harder to fall asleep in the light. And that actually isn't just a preference or an opinion either. Light affects our sleep patterns in a real way. According to the Sleep Foundation, light exposure at night can hinder transitions between sleep cycles, causing us to wake up more often and reduce the time we get in actual deep sleep. Not only that, but darkness affects the melatonin level produced in our brains. In the darkness, our brains produce more melatonin, a chemical that increases drowsiness. In the light, however, production of this chemical is halted. So not only does darkness help us fall asleep, it helps us reach a deeper level of sleep. And guess what? Spiritual darkness does the same. Spiritual darkness is really anything that keeps us keeps us from living in according with how God wants us to live. If God is light, then living without God is living in darkness. Living in spiritual darkness takes so many different forms. Sins of the flesh, to sins of greed, to sins of anger, jealousy. Sin can creep in on almost any aspect of our lives. And if we're already asleep spiritually when our guards are down, that darkness only helps keep us in a deeper sleep. And maybe this isn't a new phenomenon, but it seems more and more often we're encouraged to stay in our darkness. If we're all forgiven anyway, what's the problem if we happen to live in sin? We're sinful creatures, so why not embrace who we are? But that's not what God asks of us. When God calls us, he calls us out of sin and out of darkness. He calls us to wake up. Jesus called people out of sin. And we have two instances of Jesus telling people he encountered to go and sin no more. And that's a big command, and one that we really honestly can't hope to live up to. But Jesus isn't expecting perfection here. He's just asking us to not fall back into that same dark lifestyle that got us to where we are. He's expecting us to step into the light of a new lifestyle, one closer to what God wants us to live. He wants us to step into the light. He wants us to learn about the effect that light has on our brains, and all that stuff that we talked about holds true for spiritual life too. We step into that light, we wake up. We can expect a light that breaks our sleep. And sleepers, that light will wake us up. So what if we sleep in on our spirituality? Well, just like when we sleep in physically, we're going to miss a lot. We're going to miss those bad habits that we should be guarding against. And we might let our own understanding take us places it shouldn't take us because we aren't watching out for that. We'll miss that servant's heart that Jesus calls us to have. We'll miss being active in our faith, learning, communing with other believers, doing all the things that we're supposed to do. And we'll miss God's light that calls us awake. We'll continue to live in sin and darkness, and that sin and darkness only drives us deeper and deeper into sleep. You know, there's that old adage about the early bird getting the worm, warning against sleeping in. Just imagine, though, what we get spiritually when we stop sleeping in, when we wake up. And I can assure you it's a lot better than a bird getting a worm. We get to step out into that full light of God, fully awake in his love, his mercy, and his grace. So sleeper, wake up. It's worth getting up early for this. And all of God's people said,